Good morning, folks. Today we are going to read and study and think about the last two poems in our series of poetry. The first one is I Hear America Singing by Walt Whitman, and the second one is called I Too by Langston Hughes. So make sure you read these in order, and I'm going to read them in order for you, but make sure that you get them in that pattern because they are connected. I Too is a kind of response to I Hear America Singing, and we'll talk about that. First of all, I want to talk briefly about who Walt Whitman is. He is a very, very famous American poet. He lived from 1819 to 1892. When we talk about American literature, it's hard to not talk about it and hear Walt Whitman's name thrown around. His notable collection of poems is called Leaves of Grass, and he has a really notable poem that you might have actually heard called "Oh Captain, My Captain." I think it's like, "Oh Captain, my Captain, our fearful ship is done. Our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every wrack. The prize we sought is won." So it rhymes like that. It does follow a form. That poem was actually written about Abe Lincoln. However, what you'll learn once you study more of Whitman's poetry is that "Oh Captain, My Captain" is not typical of his usual voice and form. It rhymes and it follows a bit more structure than the rest of his poetry. He also wrote poetry during the Civil War, and he visited wounded soldiers. So his poetry from that time is really influenced by those wounded soldiers. He broke from rigid, formal poetic forms with his works, so a lot of his poetry doesn't follow very strict structure, and it doesn't follow very strict rhyme, unlike that popular one, "Oh Captain, My Captain." He also came to be associated with American democracy and culture. So, as you'll see in this poem, there's a big image or a big culture of Americans who work for their living and who work for their society and their country. So, again, he has a lot to do, or he is associated with democracy and American culture. Who is Langston Hughes? Wait, pause, please. If you have not watched the crash course video about Langston Hughes, make sure you pause this video now and do so. The video is pretty short, it's only about 10 minutes. If you've never watched a crash course by John Green, they're really good. But he gives you a lot of information about who Langston Hughes was and what his role in the Harlem Renaissance was. So, to really understand the full depth of this poem, you need to know about the Harlem Renaissance and about Langston Hughes's role in the American culture at that time, Black culture at that time, everything like that. Okay, so with these two poems, we'll be talking about American identity. And especially at the time that these poems were written, we can ask this question: what does it mean to be an American? Now, obviously, that's quite a loaded question. America is still a relatively new country in the grand scheme of things. You know, we started in 1776, so we've only had like not even 300 years yet. But even still, America has risen to kind of the top of the global theater at times and has been really influential in global society during that time. And there's a lot of different cultures and historical events that go into shaping this American identity. I'm not sure if any of you have heard about the American, well, excuse me, I'm sure most of you have heard about the idea of the American dream. I'm not sure if you've really explored what that means and what it typically is associated with. When we think of the American dream, a lot of folks think, a house and a lawn with a picket fence and a dog and a happy family and a good upper middle class life. The end. But that American dream has not always been accessible or has not even been an opportunity for a lot of groups of people in our society. So when we think about American identity, when we think about the American dream, we have to dive deeper below like the surface culture of America to really see what we're made of. Because we are indeed a collection of so many different groups of people who come from so many different places and were raised on different ideas and with different traditions. And that comes together to blend America. As you well know, right now in society in 2020, it's America seems very divisive. I'll put it that way, very divisive. But I hope that you are someone and you will grow into someone who can really step back and look at all of America for who this country is and use your judgments of right and wrong to really, I guess, kind of give fresh eyes. Okay, let's jump into I Hear America Singing by Walt Whitman. I hear America singing, the varied carols I hear, those of mechanics, each one singing his as it should be, blithe and strong. So, right off the bat, we see Walt Whitman talking about America, which is a country, singing a song. Now, literally, that's not really possible unless you had everybody in America at one time and you were like, okay, a one, a two, a three, let's go. But singing here doesn't really mean using your voice in a literal sense, like using your voice to sing music. He's kind of talking about America as being a symphony here, like an orchestra. If you have heard any music from a symphony, you know that when it's played by an orchestra, it's played by cellos and violins and piccolos and flutes and all these different, very different instruments. But they come together, they work together, and they produce a beautiful song. So here he is using the workforce as the instruments, the different cellos, maybe a mechanic is a cello, and a doctor is a violin. And he's saying when they come together, each producing their own song, it makes an American symphony. The carpenter singing his as he measures his plank or beam, the mason singing his as he makes ready for work or leaves off work, the boatman singing what belongs to him in his boat, the deckhand singing on the steamboat deck. So again, we have a lot of images here of people who work with their hands, people who are in the trades, boatmen, carpenters, masons who are like bricklayers. There's a lot of different people working on their own task here, but it comes together to produce something great, is what this poem is kind of getting at. The shoemaker singing as he sits on his bench, the hatter singing as he stands, the woodcutter's song, the ploughboy's on his way in the morning, or at noon, intermission, or at sundown, the delicious singing of the mother, or of the young wife at work, or of the girl sewing or washing, each singing what belongs to him or her and to none else. The day what belongs to the day. At night the party of young fellows, robust, friendly, singing with open mouths their strong melodious song. So here he is again talking about groups of people during the day doing their particular work that is suited to them, kind of minding their own, I guess, tasks to be completed. And then at the end of the day, coming together and still singing that robust and friendly song, but in a sort of different way. So individualism by yourself working, and then coming together, having community at the end of the day. Okay, now we are going to move to Langston Hughes's poem. But to understand that poem and why it's written the way it is, you need to know what the Jim Crow era is. The Jim Crow era took place after the Civil War and through the Civil Rights era, which was in the 1960s. Jim Crow laws were state and local laws that enforced racial segregation in the southern United States. And if you don't recall, segregation, for example, in schools was when you would have one school for white students, one school for black students, and they were not allowed to be together, and they were certainly not equitable. And if you're in ninth grade, you know that equitable means having access to the same opportunities and having having resources that are suited to a certain group of people to give them the same opportunities as the other. So Jim Crow essentially replaced slavery in the South. It's a very dark era in our history, but one that we have to come to recognize. So slavery, quote, ended in the Civil War, unquote. But after that, state and local governments took it upon themselves to create laws tied to segregation, tied to how people can behave and act in public places, tied to who could vote and who could work here and get a sandwich there. All these laws were created. Now, those weren't just like nifty little guidelines that people thought up. Those were legitimate laws produced by those state and local governments. So you have to realize that when Langston Hughes is writing this, the Jim Crow era is going on in the South, which means while all these boatmen and plowmen and masons and carpenters are working and growing and you hear America singing, there is a voice of America, a large portion of America that is distinctly, intentionally silenced. Let's go into it. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. So this stanza here is a reference to segregation. Typically one would eat in the dining room with friends, but here the, quote, darker brother, who could be the speaker, who could be Langston or someone else, is sent to the kitchen. So they're not allowed to dine with the group in the dining room. But nevertheless, they eat well, they grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Something that's very interesting about this poem is this word tomorrow, which is capitalized. Because tomorrow here means not literally the day after, but a brighter future when equality and racial justice is realized and is no longer a dream. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I, too, am America. So here again, our speaker is saying that this group of folks who call themselves America, but yet exclude part of America itself, part of what makes America beautiful, once they realize what they've done, they'll be ashamed because America has a very complex identity and an identity that reflects a very diverse group of people, and that is the true America. Okay, that is going to be the end of this video, but please watch part 2 so you can see me go over the questions for your response page right quick, or your poetry reflection questions right quick. That way you'll be able to understand the kind of answers I'm looking for.